We need space, Mom. 3 words. 3 simple words that shattered my world like glass hitting concrete. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I'd share. If you also believe that we still have value, even after 60, type 1 in the comments. And please, leave a like and subscribe. Let's show them we're strong together. The fluorescent lights in my Chicago apartment kitchen buzzed with that familiar electrical hum, casting harsh shadows across the checkered linoleum floor I'd mopped 10,000 times over the past 25 years. My hands, spotted with age and stained purple from yesterday's grape juice spill, trembled as I held the phone against my ear. The morning light filtering through my small window illuminated dust particles dancing in the air, just like the hopes I'd been clinging to. I wore my favorite floral housecoat, the one with tiny roses that had faded from deep red to pale pink after countless washes. It hung loose on my shrinking frame, 67 years old, and I'd been disappearing inch by inch, meal by meal, sacrifice by sacrifice. The fabric smelled of lavender fabric softener and the lingering ghost of last night's meatloaf, cooked for 1 but portioned for 3 out of habit. My son Michael's voice echoed through the phone speaker with that careful, measured tone he used when discussing business matters. The same voice that once called me Mommy when thunderstorms scared him, now delivered his verdict with corporate efficiency. We need space, Mom. Karen and I have been talking, and we think it would be best if you found your own place. We're starting our family, and this apartment, well, it's not really working anymore. The coffee mug in my left hand, the one that read World's Greatest Mom with a chip on the handle, slipped from my fingers. It crashed against the linoleum, sending coffee splashing across my slippers and ceramic shards skittering under the refrigerator. Brown liquid spread like spilled tears across the floor I'd cleaned for him, in the home I'd maintained for him, wearing the slippers I'd bought with grocery money I'd saved for him. But Michael, I whispered, my voice catching in my throat like a fishhook. This is our home. Your father and I, we brought you here from the hospital. Your first steps were right there by the couch. Remember when you were 7 and had pneumonia? I slept on the floor beside your bed for 2 weeks. Static filled the silence. In the background, I could hear Karen's voice, sharp and impatient. Is she crying again? Just tell her we'll help her pack. Help me pack. As if 25 years of memories could fit into boxes, labeled and stored away like seasonal decorations. I'd raised Michael in this 1-bedroom apartment on the south side, stretching every dollar until it screamed. After his father died in that construction accident when Michael was 12, I worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat, cleaning offices at night, stocking shelves at dawn, watching Mrs. Peterson's grandchildren in the afternoons. My hands had been raw and bleeding from industrial soap, but I'd hidden them in gloves so Michael wouldn't see the cost of his soccer cleats and school supplies. The apartment held ghosts of every birthday party I'd thrown on a shoestring budget. Every Christmas morning I'd made magical with presents bought in July and hidden in my closet. The wall by the kitchen table still bore pencil marks tracking Michael's height. 5'2" at age 10, 5'8" at 14, 6'1" when he graduated high school with honors I'd helped him earn through countless nights of homework supervision and patient tutoring. Mom, are you listening? Michael's voice had that edge of irritation I'd learned to recognize over the years. The same tone he'd used when I'd embarrassed him by showing affection in front of his high school friends, when I'd asked too many questions about his college girlfriends, when I'd cried at his wedding because I was so proud and so scared of losing him all at once. I'm listening, I managed, though the words felt like sandpaper against my throat. We found you a nice place. A studio apartment near the L train. It's smaller, but it'll be easier for you to manage. Karen's already called them. You can move in next weekend. Next weekend. 6 days to pack up a lifetime. 6 days to sort through photo albums filled with his childhood, report cards I'd saved, art projects I'd framed and hung on walls that would soon belong to someone else. I thought about the savings account I'd built over decades, $20 at a time when I could spare it, $50 when I got lucky with overtime. The account I'd signed over to Michael 2 years ago when Karen convinced him I was too old to handle finances properly. Money I'd intended for my own future, for emergencies, for the security I'd never had, all of it flowing toward their down payment on a house I'd never be invited to see. The apartment, Michael, I put your name on the lease because you said it would help with your credit. But this is still my home. Actually, Mom. His voice took on that patient, condescending tone adults use with confused children. Since my name is primary on the lease, and I'm the one who's been making the payments. The lie hit me like a physical blow. I'd made every rent payment for 25 years, written every check from my account, never missed a single month even when I'd had to choose between groceries and electricity. But somehow, in the maze of paperwork and trust I'd granted him, the truth had been rewritten. I've been paying the rent, Michael. Every month. From my own account. With money from the family account. Karen's voice interrupted from the background, clear enough that she'd moved closer to the phone. Money that technically belongs to both of you, which means it belongs to us as your family. Family account. The checking account I'd opened in our joint name so Michael could help me with banking, back when I'd thought having someone to share responsibilities with was a gift rather than a trap. I sank into the kitchen chair where I'd fed him countless bowls of cereal, where I'd helped him with algebra homework, where I'd listened to his teenage heartbreaks and offered comfort with homemade cookies and maternal wisdom. The chair's vinyl seat, patched with duct tape in 2 places, exhaled a soft wheeze under my weight. When do I need to be out? The question escaped before I could stop it. A surrender disguised as logistics. Saturday would be good, Michael said, his voice already moving on to other matters. We'll come by Friday night to help you pack the important stuff. Don't worry about the furniture. Most of it's pretty old anyway. Old. Like me. Like the couch where we'd watch Disney movies. Like the dining table where we'd eaten birthday dinners. Like the woman who'd sacrificed everything to give him the life he now lived. After he hung up, I sat in my kitchen surrounded by the debris of my shattered coffee mug and 25 years of naive maternal love. The refrigerator hummed its familiar tune, the same sound that had lullabied me through countless sleepless nights when worry about bills or Michael's future had kept me awake. On the counter, propped against a ceramic cookie jar shaped like a rooster, stood a photo from Michael's college graduation. We stood together in cap and gown. He'd insisted I wear one too, saying I'd earned it just as much as he had through all the sacrifices I'd made for his education. In the picture, his arm wrapped around my shoulders, and we both beamed with pride and love and the unshakable belief that we were a team, a family, an unbreakable bond forged through hardship and devotion. That night, I dreamed of packing boxes in an endless loop, each item I wrapped in newspaper dissolving in my hands like smoke, leaving me clutching empty air and the growing certainty that everything I'd thought permanent was as fragile as morning mist. Friday evening arrived like a funeral procession. I'd spent the week in a daze, mechanically folding clothes and wrapping dishes in newspaper, each item a small burial of memory. The cardboard boxes I'd collected from behind the Jewel Osco grocery store sat half-packed around my living room, testament to a life being dismantled piece by piece. At exactly 6 o'clock, I heard Michael's key in the lock. The sound made my stomach clench. How many times had I waited for that sound with joy, rushing to greet him with dinner warming on the stove and questions about his day ready on my lips? Now it felt like an invasion. He entered with Karen trailing behind, both of them wearing the kind of casual, expensive clothes that spoke of disposable income I'd never known. Karen's designer handbag probably cost more than I spent on groceries in 3 months. Her manicured fingers drummed against her phone case as she surveyed my modest home with barely concealed disdain. Oh, Mom. Michael sighed, as if my very existence disappointed him. You've barely packed anything. We told you we'd be here tonight. I gestured weakly at the boxes scattered around the room. I've been working on it all week. There's just so much history here. Karen stepped over a box labeled Michael's School Papers, without even glancing down. We really need to be efficient about this. The new tenants want to do a walkthrough tomorrow morning. New tenants. They'd already replaced me. I watched Michael pick up a framed photo from the mantelpiece. The 2 of us at Navy Pier when he was 8. Cotton candy sticky on his fingers, my arm around his small shoulders as we posed in front of the Ferris wheel. He looked at it for a moment, and I held my breath, hoping to see some flicker of the boy who'd begged me to ride every ride twice that day. He set it face down in a box without a word. Tell me something, I said, my voice shakier than I'd intended. Do you remember when you had appendicitis? You were 16. Michael's jaw tightened. Mom, we don't have time for... The hospital bill was $8,000. The memory spilled out of me like water from a broken dam. Insurance covered half. I took out a payday loan to cover the rest, then worked double shifts for 6 months to pay it off. Remember what you said when you woke up from surgery? His hands stilled on the box he was packing. Karen looked between us with the sharp attention of someone sensing drama. You said, Mom, I'm sorry I cost so much money. And I told you that you were worth every penny, that I'd sell everything I owned to keep you safe. My voice cracked on the last word. I meant it then. I'd still mean it now. That's different, Michael muttered, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. Is it? When you wanted to go to Northwestern instead of community college, who took out the second mortgage on this place? When you couldn't find a job after graduation and needed to live at home for 2 years, who never made you feel like a burden? Karen stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. That's what parents are supposed to do. It's not like you kept receipts expecting payment. The cruelty of it took my breath away. She was right. I'd never expected payment. I'd expected love, respect, gratitude. I'd expected the grown man I'd raised to remember the woman who'd sacrificed everything for his future. I walked to my bedroom and returned with a shoebox I'd been hiding under my bed. Inside were canceled checks, receipts, medical bills, 25 years of financial records I'd kept because my mother had taught me to save important papers. Northwestern tuition, I said, pulling out a stack of documents. $43,000 over 4 years. Car insurance when you were a teenager after you totaled the Honda. Remember that? I told the police it was my fault so your rates wouldn't go up. Wedding costs? I paid for the flowers, the photographer, and half the catering because you said Karen's parents couldn't afford their share. Each piece of paper felt like evidence in a trial where I was both prosecutor and victim. The security deposit on your first apartment, I continued, my voice gaining strength from the growing pile of proof. First, last, and security, $3,600. The loan I co-signed for your car. The credit card debt I paid off when you couldn't find work. Michael's face had gone pale. You never said any of this bothered you. Because it didn't. The words exploded out of me. I was happy to help. I was proud to be able to give you things I never had. But I thought it meant something to you. I thought I meant something to you. Karen laughed, a sound like ice cracking. You can't buy love, Eleanor. And you can't guilt people into gratitude. Buy love. As if every sacrifice I'd made had been a transaction rather than an expression of the deepest love a mother could feel. I thought about the promotions I'd turned down because they required weekend work, and Michael had little league games. The dates I'd declined because a teenager needed his mother at home. The dreams I'd deferred. College, travel. A career that paid more than survival wages. All set aside so he could have every opportunity I'd never had. I never asked you to do any of that, Michael said quietly, still not looking at me. I never asked you to sacrifice your life for mine. The words hit harder than a physical blow. Because he was right. He'd never asked. I'd given freely, joyfully, without reservation or expectation of return. And somehow, in his mind, that made my sacrifices worthless rather than precious. I remembered the night shift I'd worked at the hospital cafeteria, coming home at dawn to find 12-year-old Michael asleep at the kitchen table, his math homework half finished. I'd made him breakfast, helped him complete his assignment, and sent him to school with a lunch I'd packed while he slept. Then I'd collapsed into bed for 3 hours before my afternoon job began. The Christmas I'd worked overtime for 2 months to buy him the skateboard he'd wanted, wrapping it in newspaper because I couldn't afford gift wrap. His face had lit up Christmas morning like the sun breaking through clouds, and he'd hugged me so tight I'd thought my ribs might crack. You're the best mom in the world, he'd whispered in my ear. Where was that boy now? When had gratitude curdled into resentment? When had my love become a burden instead of a gift? The studio apartment we found for you, Karen said, consulting her phone. It's really quite nice. Hardwood floors, updated kitchen. It'll be much easier for you to maintain. Easier to maintain. Code for smaller, cheaper, more appropriate for someone who'd outlived her usefulness. How much is the rent? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. $1,200 a month, Michael said. But don't worry, it includes utilities. $1,200. More than half my Social Security check. I'd have to find work. But who wanted to hire a 67-year-old woman with arthritic hands and a 25-year gap in her resume? I can't afford that, I whispered. You'll figure it out, Karen said with a shrug. Maybe you can get a roommate. Or there are programs for seniors who need financial assistance. Programs? Charity. The woman who'd never asked for help, who'd worked 3 jobs to avoid taking handouts, reduced to begging strangers for survival. As they continued packing my life into boxes, I noticed what they chose to keep and what they discarded. Michael's baby clothes, carefully preserved in cedar chests. Thrown away. The quilt I'd hand-stitched during my pregnancy, every stitch a prayer for his health and happiness. Deemed too old-fashioned. The photo albums chronicling every milestone of his childhood. Too bulky for the new apartment. But the antique jewelry box that had belonged to my mother, worth perhaps $200, that went into Karen's purse for safekeeping. By 10 o'clock, they'd reduced my 25 years in this apartment to 6 cardboard boxes and 2 suitcases. Everything else was either thrown away or claimed for their new house. We'll pick you up Saturday morning, Michael said, avoiding my eyes as he headed for the door. The moving truck will be here at 9. After they left, I sat alone in my dismantled living room, surrounded by the debris of a life being erased. The walls showed pale rectangles where pictures had hung, ghostly evidence of the family photos they'd deemed unworthy of preservation. In the silence, I could hear Mrs. Kowalski's television through the thin walls, the same Polish game show she watched every Friday night. Soon, someone else would learn the rhythm of her habits, would hear her grandchildren visiting on Sundays, would become part of the building's invisible community while I started over in a place where no one knew my name. I pulled out one photo they'd missed. Michael at age 5, gap-toothed and grinning, wearing the Superman costume I'd sewn by hand, because store-bought ones were too expensive. In the picture, he was looking at me with absolute adoration, complete trust, unconditional love. Was I used? I whispered to the empty room, my voice echoing off walls that had heard decades of laughter, arguments, celebrations, and quiet moments of contentment. The silence that answered felt like a verdict. The studio apartment at 1247 West Fullerton smelled of industrial carpet cleaner and broken dreams. 400 square feet of beige walls, a kitchenette smaller than my old bathroom, and a Murphy bed that groaned like an arthritic joint every time I pulled it down. The single window faced a brick wall so close I could touch it with my fingertips, blocking out all but a sliver of Chicago sky. My 6 boxes sat unopened in the corner, monuments to a life that no longer fit anywhere. The first week passed in a haze of sleepless nights and silent tears. I'd wake at dawn out of habit, forgetting for those precious few seconds that I no longer had anyone to cook breakfast for, no one whose day I needed to organize, no purpose beyond my own hollow existence. Tuesday marked my 68th birthday. I sat on the Murphy bed's thin mattress, listening to the radiator clank and hiss, waiting for a phone call that never came. At 3 in the afternoon, I finally broke down and called Michael myself. Hello? His voice was distracted, busy. I could hear Karen laughing in the background, the sound of their new life in full swing. Hi, honey. It's Mom. A pause. Oh, hi, Mom. What's up? What's up? As if I were a casual acquaintance rather than the woman who'd given him life. I was wondering if you remembered what today is. Another pause, longer this time. I could hear him thinking, perhaps checking his phone's calendar. Tuesday? He said finally. The word hit me like a physical blow. 68 years on this earth, and my only child couldn't remember the day I was born. It's my birthday, Michael. Silence stretched between us like a chasm. In the background, Karen's voice grew sharper. Is that your mother again? Tell her we're busy. Oh God, Mom, I'm sorry. Happy birthday. We've just been so busy with the new house and everything. It's okay, I lied, because what else could I say? That I'd been sitting alone since sunrise, hoping for just one person in the world to acknowledge that I mattered, that I'd made myself a cupcake from a box mix and stuck a single candle in it, then couldn't bring myself to light it because the symbolism felt too pathetic. We'll make it up to you, he said, but his voice already sounded like it was moving away from the phone. Maybe dinner next week or something. Next week became next month, which became when things settled down, which became silence. By October, my savings account, what little Michael and Karen hadn't absorbed, dwindled to dangerous levels. The $1,200 rent consumed most of my Social Security, leaving me with barely enough for food and utilities. I'd learned to make 1 can of soup last 2 days, to buy day-old bread from the discount bakery, to choose between heat and electricity when money ran short. I applied for jobs with the desperate energy of someone drowning. Walmart turned me down for being overqualified. McDonald's said they'd found a better fit. The grocery store where I'd shopped for 25 years acted like I was invisible when I inquired about openings. One gray November morning, I woke up feeling dizzy and weak. I'd been rationing my blood pressure medication, cutting pills in half to make them last longer, telling myself I was being prudent rather than reckless. When I tried to stand, the room spun like a carnival ride, and I collapsed back onto the bed with my heart hammering against my ribs. I called Michael's number with shaking fingers. "You've reached Michael and Karen Morrison. We can't come to the phone right now, but leave a message and we'll get back to you." The beep felt like a door slamming shut. "Michael, it's Mom. I'm not feeling well. I think I might need to go to the hospital, but I don't want to call an ambulance if it's nothing serious. Could you call me back? Please?" Hours passed. My phone remained silent. I called again at noon. Same automated message, same plea for help echoing into the void. By evening, I'd called 6 times. On the 7th attempt, Karen answered with barely concealed irritation. "What, Eleanor? We're trying to have dinner. Is Michael there?" I left messages. "I'm really not feeling well. He's busy. What's wrong with you now? What's wrong with you now?" As if my health problems were a personal inconvenience rather than genuine medical concerns. "I've been dizzy all day, and my chest feels tight. I think it might be my blood pressure medication, or maybe—" "Did you call your doctor?" "I tried, but they're booked until next week, and then go to urgent care. That's what it's for." The line went dead. I sat alone in my efficiency apartment, $70 in my checking account, no car, no family willing to help, facing the choice between a $150 urgent care visit or hoping I'd survive whatever was happening to my body. I chose hope, and survived. Barely. December brought the first real test of my new reality. Christmas had always been our tradition. I'd cook for days, making Michael's favorite dishes, wrapping presents I'd saved for months to afford. The apartment would smell like cinnamon and pine, warm with love and laughter and the comfortable chaos of family celebration. This year, I bought a small artificial tree from the dollar store and strung it with lights I'd found in my boxes. It looked pathetic in the corner of my tiny space, but it was something. It was acknowledgement that the season still mattered, even if I was the only one who seemed to remember. I called Michael on December 20th. "Hi, Mom." His voice was rushed, distracted. "I was wondering about Christmas dinner. Should I plan something small here, or would you prefer to—" "Actually, Mom, we're going to Karen's parents' place this year. Her mom's not doing well, and they specifically requested just immediate family. Just immediate family." After 28 years of Christmas dinners, I was no longer immediate family. "What about Christmas Eve then? We always do Christmas Eve together. We've got plans. Karen's work party, then midnight mass with her family." It's kind of a whole thing. A whole thing. Everything was a whole thing now, except for the woman who'd given him life. "Well, maybe we could exchange gifts sometime between Christmas and New Year's. I got you something small, nothing expensive, but—" "Mom, honestly, we're just so busy right now. Maybe we can catch up after the holidays when everything calms down." After the holidays when everything calms down. The same promise he'd been making for months. The same carrot dangled just out of reach. The same lie wrapped in politeness and delivered with casual cruelty. Christmas morning, I woke up alone. I made coffee in my one clean mug and sat by my dollar store tree, listening to the family upstairs exchange excited squeals over presents. Through my thin walls, I could hear children laughing, parents cooing over handmade gifts, the warm chaos of love in action. My phone sat silent on the kitchenette counter. By noon, I couldn't stand the quiet anymore. I bundled up in my threadbare winter coat and walked to Grant Park, where other lonely souls wandered among the frozen gardens. An elderly man sat on a bench feeding pigeons from a bag of stale bread, and we nodded at each other with the recognition of people who understood solitude. "Merry Christmas," he said softly. "Merry Christmas," I replied, and for a moment, we were family to each other, two forgotten people acknowledging that we still existed, still mattered, still deserved basic human kindness. That night, I opened my one present to myself, a paperback romance novel I'd found at a used bookstore. The heroine was young and beautiful, and loved completely by a man who would never abandon her. I read until my eyes burned, living vicariously through someone else's happy ending, because my own story seemed to have forgotten how joy was supposed to work. At midnight, as the city celebrated the end of Christmas Day, I sat in my Murphy bed and asked the silence, was I used? This time, the answer came not in silence, but in the aching certainty that yes, I had been used. Thoroughly, completely, without reservation or recognition. I'd been a resource to be drained, a service to be consumed, a convenience to be discarded when more attractive options became available. The woman who'd worked 3 jobs to put Michael through college, who'd sacrificed every personal dream for his success, who'd given him 25 years of unconditional love and financial support, had been reduced to an inconvenience they tolerated out of social obligation. But as I sat there in the dark, something else began to stir beneath the pain. Something hard and bright and surprisingly fierce. Anger. January arrived with a blizzard that buried Chicago under 2 feet of snow and my building's heating system under a mountain of repair bills. For 3 days, I huddled under every blanket I owned, my breath visible in the frigid air of my studio apartment. The landlord's promises of immediate attention evaporated like steam from my coffee mug. On the 4th morning, when my fingers had turned blue from cold and I could no longer feel my toes, I made a decision that would change everything. I picked up my phone and dialed Michael's number, not to beg for help, but to demand it. "Mom? What's wrong?" His voice carried that familiar edge of impatience, as if my very existence was an inconvenience. "The heat's been out for 3 days. It's 38 degrees in my apartment. I need somewhere to stay until it's fixed." Silence stretched across the line like ice forming on a pond. That's really unfortunate. Have you called the landlord?" 6 times. "He says the repair company can't get here until next week because of the storm." "Well, what about a hotel? There's a Motel 6 on—" "With what money, Michael?" The words came out sharper than I'd intended, edged with months of accumulated frustration. "You know what I'm living on." Another pause. I could hear Karen's voice in the background, though I couldn't make out the words. Her tone was unmistakably annoyed. "Hold on, Mom." The phone went muffled, but I caught fragments of their conversation through his palm. "Can't just show up here whenever. Only for a few days. Setting a precedent. Our space. Our space." Those words again, wielded like a weapon to keep me at arm's length. Michael returned to the phone, his voice artificially bright with forced cheerfulness. "Mom, I talked to Karen, and we think it would be better if we helped you find a temporary solution that doesn't complicate things here." "Complicate things?" I repeated, tasting the bitter irony. "I'm asking my son for help, and it complicates things? You know that's not what I mean. It's just that Karen's pregnant. We haven't told anyone yet, and she's been really sensitive to disruptions in routine. The stress isn't good for the baby. Pregnant." The word hit me like a physical blow, not because I wasn't happy for them, but because I learned about my future grandchild as an excuse for why I couldn't seek shelter in their home. "Congratulations," I whispered, and meant it despite everything. "I'm going to be a grandmother." "Yeah, well, that's why we need to be careful about Karen's environment right now. I'm sure you understand." I understood perfectly. I understood that my future grandchild would grow up never knowing the woman who'd raised their father. I understood that my pregnancy with Michael, working until the day I went into labor, sleeping on a mattress on the floor because we couldn't afford a bed frame, had been irrelevant suffering compared to Karen's need for an undisturbed environment. "What exactly are you suggesting?" I asked. "Well, there's a warming center at St. Mary's Catholic Church. It's open during cold emergencies. You could stay there until your heat gets fixed. A warming center. A homeless shelter. He was suggesting his mother spend her nights among strangers, sleeping on a cot in a church basement, because helping her himself would be too complicated. Michael, I raised you better than this. Don't guilt-trip me, Mom. I'm trying to help. Are you? Because from where I'm sitting, literally shivering in a freezing apartment, it feels like you're trying to get rid of a problem. That's when Karen took the phone. Eleanor, let me be very clear. Her voice had the crisp authority of someone accustomed to getting her way. Michael has done enough for you over the years. We're starting our own family now, and we can't be responsible for solving every crisis in your life. Every crisis? The words came out as a strangled laugh. This is the first time I've asked for help since you moved me out of my home. You mean the apartment that Michael was paying for? The place where you lived rent-free for how many years? The lie was so audacious it took my breath away. I paid every single month's rent on that apartment for 25 years, with money from the joint account that Michael contributed to, money that he earned. I worked 3 jobs to put him through college, and he's grateful for that. But that doesn't make him responsible for supporting you for the rest of your life. Supporting me, as if asking for temporary shelter during a heating emergency was equivalent to demanding lifelong financial dependency. Karen, I'm 68 years old. It's been below zero for 4 days, and I haven't been warm since Monday. I'm not asking for support. I'm asking for basic human decency from my family, and we're offering it. The warming center is a perfectly reasonable solution. Lots of seniors use it during cold snaps. Lots of seniors without families. Seniors whose children hadn't abandoned them to bureaucratic charity because pregnancy made them too delicate to accommodate the woman who'd sacrificed everything for their comfort. Let me talk to Michael, I said. He doesn't want to talk to you right now. You're upsetting him. And stress isn't good for me in my condition. Stress wasn't good for her condition. But apparently, hypothermia was perfectly acceptable for mine. Fine, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Give him a message from me. Tell him that his mother called asking for help, and he chose to send her to a homeless shelter instead of letting her sleep on his couch for 3 nights. Tell him that's the man he's chosen to be. I hung up before she could respond. 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text message from Michael. Mom, you're being dramatic. The warming center is clean and safe. I can pick you up and drive you there if you need transportation. Transportation to my exile. How thoughtful. I stared at the message for a long time, reading between the lines of his careful politeness. This was the boy I'd rocked to sleep when nightmares woke him. The teenager I'd driven to basketball practice in a car held together with prayer and duct tape. The young man I'd hugged goodbye when he left for college, both of us crying because we'd never been apart for more than a few days. When had he become someone who could send his mother to a shelter without losing sleep over it? My phone rang. The caller ID showed my neighbor Mrs. Kowalski's number. Eleanor, I heard through the walls that your heat is out too. Mine's been working fine. Why don't you come stay with me until they fix your unit? Mrs. Kowalski was 82, a Polish immigrant who spoke broken English and lived on Social Security that made my modest income look generous. She had arthritis so severe that opening jars required 2 people, and her apartment was smaller than mine. But she offered what my own son wouldn't: basic human kindness. Are you sure, Anna? I don't want to impose. Impose? Bah! We're neighbors. Neighbors help neighbors. My grandson brings me groceries tomorrow. I'll have him pick up extra for you too. Her grandson, who still brought her groceries and checked on her welfare, who didn't consider her survival an inconvenience to his lifestyle. That evening, as I settled into Mrs. Kowalski's modest but warm living room, she served me tea in delicate china cups that had survived her journey from Poland 60 years ago. Your son, she said carefully, he doesn't visit much anymore. It wasn't a question. No, I admitted. He's busy with his own life now. Mrs. Kowalski nodded sadly. My daughter in California, she calls every Sunday. Same time, every week. 23 years she's been calling every Sunday. She sipped her tea thoughtfully. Some children remember. Some forget. Not much we can do about forgetting children except love them anyway and take care of ourselves. Take care of ourselves. The radical notion that my well-being was my responsibility, not something to be negotiated through guilt and manipulation with people who'd already decided I was expendable. That night, warm for the first time in days, I lay on Mrs. Kowalski's couch and thought about family, real family. The kind that showed up during emergencies instead of making excuses. The kind that offered shelter without conditions, help without resentment, love without transaction fees. I thought about the warming center where Michael had been willing to send me, about the other elderly people who would sleep there tonight because their families had also discovered that love came with expiration dates and convenience clauses. Most of all, I thought about the grandchild growing in Karen's womb and wondered what kind of world they'd enter. Would they learn that family was conditional, that love came with strings attached, that the people who sacrificed for you were ultimately disposable when their usefulness expired? In the morning, I would start making changes. Real changes. The kind that couldn't be undone with pretty words or hollow apologies. But first, I would sleep warm, thanks to the kindness of a neighbor who understood what family was supposed to mean, even when blood relatives had forgotten. Monday morning arrived crisp and clear, the kind of January day that made Chicago look like a postcard despite the bitter cold. My heat had been restored over the weekend, but I remained in Mrs. Kowalski's apartment, reluctant to return to the isolation of my studio. Something had shifted during those 3 days of unexpected kindness, a recognition that warmth came from more than just working radiators. I sat at Anna's kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of strong coffee, staring at my phone. Michael had sent 2 text messages over the weekend, both brief and clinical. "Hope your heat is fixed," and "Karen says hi." No apology for offering to drive me to a homeless shelter. No acknowledgement that his response to my emergency had been heartless. Just casual indifference wrapped in polite words. "You look like woman with plan," Mrs. Kowalski observed, settling into the chair across from me with her own steaming mug. Her dark eyes, sharp despite her 82 years, studied my face with the intuition of someone who'd survived enough of life's cruelties to recognize determination when she saw it. "I think I am," I said slowly, surprised by the truth of it. "I think I'm finally done being treated like an inconvenience." She nodded approvingly. "Good. Inconvenience is what you make toilet paper when it runs out, not what you make people who love you." Her broken English somehow made the wisdom more profound. I pulled out a small notebook I'd found in my boxes, one I'd used years ago to track household expenses when every dollar mattered. Now I would use it for something more important. Planning my liberation. The first item on my list was brutally simple. Stop the money. For 18 months, I'd been automatically transferring $300 monthly from my meager Social Security into the joint account that Michael managed. Originally, it was supposed to be our emergency fund, money we'd both contribute to and both could access during hard times. In practice, it had become a slush fund for his convenience while my emergencies went unaddressed. My second item, reclaim my independence. My third, document everything. Mrs. Kowalski watched me write, occasionally nodding as if she could read my thoughts. "My husband," she said suddenly, "when he died, his brother tried to take our savings. Said because my English no good, I need help managing money. I show him papers, bank statements, prove every penny my husband leave me. He go away very fast when he see I not stupid old woman. What did you tell him?" She smiled, and for a moment I could see the fierce young woman who'd crossed an ocean to build a new life. "I tell him, in Poland we have saying, when someone show you who they are, believe them first time. He show me he want my money, not help me. So I believe him and make sure he never get chance to show me again. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time." Michael had shown me exactly who he was during my heating crisis. Karen had been even more explicit. I'd been refusing to believe them because the truth was too painful to accept. The son I'd raised had become someone who could watch his mother suffer rather than inconvenience himself. At 9 o'clock sharp, I walked the 6 blocks to First National Bank, the same institution where I'd maintained accounts for 30 years. The morning air cut through my wool coat, but I felt warmer with each step, energized by purpose in a way I hadn't experienced since before my exile began. The branch manager, Patricia Chen, recognized me immediately. "Mrs. Morrison, How nice to see you. How can we help you today? I need to make some changes to my accounts, I said, settling into the chair across from her desk. And I have some questions about transactions that have been made without my explicit authorization. Patricia's professional smile faltered slightly. Of course. Let me pull up your account information. As she typed, I explained the situation with clinical precision. The joint account Michael had convinced me to establish. The automatic transfers that had been draining my individual savings. The way my name had been removed from various financial documents without my knowledge. I want to close the joint account immediately and transfer my portion back to my individual savings, I said. And I want to review every transaction from the past 2 years. Patricia's fingers moved across her keyboard, and her expression grew increasingly serious. Mrs. Morrison, I need to ask you some questions about these transactions. Some of them appear unusual. She turned her monitor toward me, and I stared at numbers that made my stomach clench. The joint account, which should have contained nearly $8,000 in combined contributions, showed a balance of $47.36. Where did the money go? I whispered. Patricia scrolled through months of transactions. House down payment, $5,000. Wedding expenses, $200. Car repair, $800. Vacation deposit, $1,500. Each withdrawal authorized by Michael's signature alone, despite my name being on the account. According to our records, Patricia said carefully, Mr. Morrison has full authorization to make withdrawals. The account was set up with his name as primary holder. But it's my money, too. I've been contributing $300 every month. Yes, I can see your deposits. But legally, since he's the primary account holder, he has the authority to withdraw funds without your co-signature. My hands began to shake. 18 months of contributions, $5,400 of my limited income had been absorbed into Michael's lifestyle while I rationed food and medication to make ends meet. Can I get my money back? Patricia's expression was sympathetic, but grim. That would require his agreement to transfer funds or legal action to prove misuse of joint assets. I'm sorry, Mrs. Morrison, this is more common than you might think. More common than I might think. An epidemic of adult children draining their elderly parents' resources while maintaining plausible deniability through legal technicalities. Close the account, I said firmly. Transfer whatever's left to my individual savings and remove his access to everything else. Are you sure? This might cause complications with your family relationship. I thought about 3 days of freezing in my apartment while Michael worried about Karen's stress levels. I thought about Christmas morning spent alone while they celebrated with immediate family that didn't include me. I thought about every sacrifice I'd made being dismissed as ancient history, while every dollar I contributed was treated as their rightful inheritance. I'm absolutely sure. The paperwork took an hour. With each form I signed, each authorization I revoked, I felt pieces of myself returning. The woman who'd worked 3 jobs and raised a son alone, who'd made difficult decisions and survived impossible circumstances, who'd somehow forgotten her own strength during months of being treated like a burden. When Patricia handed me the receipt showing my reclaimed individual account, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Control over my own life. My phone rang as I walked home. Michael's name appeared on the screen. Mom, what the hell did you do? His voice carried an edge of panic I'd never heard before. The bank called me about the joint account. They said you closed it? I did. But that was our emergency fund. We were counting on that money for the baby's nursery. Our emergency fund. The money I'd contributed while he ignored my actual emergencies. Money they'd been counting on to decorate a room in a house I'd never be invited to see. Michael, you spent my money without asking me. Nearly $6,000. It was our money. Money we were saving together. Money I was saving while you were spending. There's a difference. I could hear Karen's voice in the background, shrill and angry. She can't just take our money? Our money. Resources I'd scraped together from Social Security payments while they planned vacations and home improvements. Mom, this is ridiculous. You're being vindictive. Vindictive. The word settled in my chest like a physical weight. Protecting my own financial resources was vindictive. Refusing to subsidize their lifestyle while I struggled to survive was vindictive. No, Michael, I'm being responsible. For the first time in months, I'm taking care of myself instead of waiting for other people to value my well-being. You can't just cut us off. Cut them off. As if my modest Social Security income was their lifeline rather than my survival. I'm not cutting you off. I'm stopping the automatic transfer of money I can't afford to give away. If you want a relationship with me, it needs to be based on love, not on my bank account. Silence stretched across the line. When Michael spoke again, his voice had turned cold and calculating, the tone he'd learned to use during business negotiations. Fine, but don't expect us to come running every time you have some crisis. Independence works both ways. The threat was clear. Behave or face complete abandonment. I understand, I said quietly, and I'll remember that the next time you call asking for help. I hung up before he could respond. That evening, I sat in my own apartment for the first time in days, surrounded by my meager possessions, but feeling wealthier than I had in months. The silence that had once felt oppressive now felt peaceful. The solitude that had seemed like punishment now felt like freedom. I opened my notebook and wrote a single line. Day 1 of the rest of my life. For the first time since this nightmare began, I fell asleep without crying. 2 weeks of silence stretched between us like a battlefield marked by invisible landmines. Michael's threat, "Don't expect us to come running," had revealed the transactional nature of what I'd mistaken for family love. But instead of the devastation he'd probably expected, I found something unexpected in the quiet. Peace. I'd established new routines that belonged entirely to me. Morning coffee with Mrs. Kowalski, where we discussed everything from Polish folk remedies to Chicago politics. Afternoon walks through Lincoln Park, where I fed pigeons and watched young parents push their children on swings, remembering when Michael had been small enough to fit in my lap on those same playground rides. Evening phone calls with Margaret Sullivan, a widow I'd met at the grocery store who understood the peculiar loneliness of being discarded by children you'd raised with infinite love. For the first time in my adult life, my schedule revolved around my own needs rather than someone else's expectations. But Michael wasn't finished with me yet. Friday evening brought an unexpected knock on my door. Through the peephole, I saw 3 figures standing in the hallway. Michael, Karen, and a woman I didn't recognize holding a briefcase. Karen's pregnancy was beginning to show, a small, rounded bump that should have filled me with joy, but instead reminded me that my grandchild would grow up thinking their grandmother was a selfish woman who'd abandoned the family. I opened the door but didn't invite them in. "Hello, Michael." He looked uncomfortable, avoiding my eyes while Karen stepped forward with the aggressive confidence of someone accustomed to getting her way. "We need to talk," Karen announced, as if my studio apartment was a boardroom she'd booked for a business meeting. "About what?" "About your behavior. About the damage you're doing to this family." She gestured to the stranger beside her. "This is Janet Wilson. She's a social worker who specializes in family mediation." A social worker. They'd brought professional backup to deal with their inconvenient mother problem. "I wasn't aware we needed mediation," I said, but I stepped aside to let them enter. Curiosity, perhaps. Or maybe I wanted to see exactly how far they were willing to go. My tiny apartment felt even smaller with 4 people crowded into the space between my Murphy bed and kitchenette. Janet Wilson arranged herself in my single chair with practiced authority, while Michael and Karen stood near the door like they might need to escape quickly. "Mrs. Morrison," Janet began, consulting notes in her folder. "Your son and daughter-in-law have expressed concern about some recent changes in your behavior. They're worried about your mental health and your ability to make sound financial decisions." My mental health. Because refusing to subsidize their lifestyle was clearly evidence of cognitive decline. "What specific behaviors concern them?" I asked. Janet flipped through her papers. "Sudden changes to banking arrangements. Social isolation. Rejection of family support systems. These can be signs of depression or early dementia in seniors. Social isolation. Rejection of family support systems. They'd managed to reframe my liberation as pathology, my self-preservation as mental illness." "I see. And what support systems have I rejected?" Karen jumped in before Janet could respond. "We offered to help you through your housing transition. We found you this apartment. We've tried to maintain contact, but you've been resistant to our efforts." resistant to their efforts. The Orwellian language they'd constructed to describe abandoning me in a freezing apartment while they worried about pregnancy stress. Karen, you suggested I go to a homeless shelter when my heat went out. That's the support system I rejected. That was a temporary emergency solution, Michael said defensively. We were trying to think practically. Practically for whom? Not for the 68-year-old woman sitting in a 38-degree apartment for 3 days. Janet intervened with the smooth professionalism of someone who'd mediated countless family disputes. Mrs. Morrison, I understand you've experienced some difficult transitions recently. Loss of your long-term housing, financial constraints, health concerns. These stressors can affect our judgment and make us feel defensive when family members try to help. Health concerns. I hadn't mentioned any health concerns. What health concerns are you referring to? Another glance at her notes. Your son mentioned episodes of dizziness, possible medication non-compliance, concerning phone calls requesting emergency assistance. Episodes of dizziness from rationing blood pressure medication I couldn't afford. Medication non-compliance because I was choosing between pills and food. Concerning phone calls where I'd begged for help during a medical emergency and been told to handle it myself. They'd taken my struggles caused directly by their financial abandonment, and reframed them as evidence that I was incompetent to manage my own affairs. I see. And what solution are you proposing? Karen leaned forward with barely contained excitement. There's a lovely assisted living facility in Naperville, Sunset Manor. They have immediate availability in their memory care unit. Memory care unit. They wanted to institutionalize me for the crime of refusing to bankroll their comfort. I don't have memory problems, I said calmly. Well, that's what evaluation would determine, Janet replied smoothly. Your family is willing to help with the costs, and the facility provides comprehensive care for seniors who might be struggling with independent living. Because asking family for help during emergencies was evidence of incompetence rather than normal human need for community support. How much does this facility cost? I asked. Michael shifted uncomfortably. It's about $4,000 a month, but they have financial assistance programs. $4,000 a month, nearly double my entire Social Security income. They wanted to warehouse me in an institution I could never afford, trapping me in debt while they managed my remaining assets for my own good. And who would be responsible for the shortfall between what I can pay and what it costs? Silence stretched between them like a held breath. Well, Karen said finally, we'd work something out. Maybe some of your remaining savings and family contributions and the savings you already spent without my permission? Janet consulted her notes again. According to your family, those were legitimate shared expenses from jointly held accounts. Legitimate shared expenses. Their vacation deposits and house down payments, financed by my Social Security contributions while I lived in poverty. I stood up, feeling calmer than I had in months. I need all of you to leave now. Mom, please, Michael started. No, the word came out with surprising force. You brought a social worker to my home to declare me mentally incompetent because I stopped giving you money I couldn't afford to lose. You want to institutionalize me for refusing to subsidize your lifestyle. You've redefined my survival instincts as mental illness. We're trying to help you, Karen protested. You're trying to control me. There's a difference. I walked to my door and opened it, feeling stronger with each step. Janet, I appreciate your time, but I don't need family mediation. I need family members who treat me with basic human dignity. Since that appears to be unavailable, I'll manage my own affairs. Mrs. Morrison, Janet said, rising reluctantly. If you change your mind, I won't. Michael lingered in the doorway, his face cycling through emotions I couldn't quite read. For a moment, he looked like the boy who'd cried when I dropped him off for his first day of kindergarten. Mom, I don't understand why you're being so stubborn about this. We're trying to take care of you. No, Michael. You're trying to take care of yourselves. You want me contained somewhere I can't embarrass you with my needs or complicate your lives with my emergencies. You want me grateful for the privilege of being discarded. His face hardened. Fine. But don't come crying to us when you can't manage on your own. After they left, I sat in my small apartment and felt something settle in my chest like a bird finally finding its perch. They'd shown me exactly who they were, and I'd finally chosen to believe them. I pulled out my notebook and wrote, "The day I stopped begging for love from people who were never going to give it." Then I picked up my phone and called Mrs. Kowalski. "Anna, it's Eleanor. Would you like to have dinner together tonight? I feel like celebrating." Spring arrived in Chicago like a whispered promise, carrying the scent of possibility on warming breezes that stirred something dormant in my soul. 3 months had passed since the confrontation with Michael and Karen, 3 months of silence that had gradually transformed from punishment into gift. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror on a Tuesday morning in April, studying the face of a woman I was just beginning to recognize. The worry lines around my eyes had softened. My shoulders no longer carried the perpetual hunch of someone bracing for the next emotional blow. For the first time in years, I looked peaceful. "Good morning, Eleanor," I said to my reflection, a ritual I'd started weeks ago. What adventure will today bring? The question would have seemed absurd during the dark months of winter, when survival consumed every thought and energy felt like a finite resource I couldn't afford to waste. But something profound had shifted in the space between their rejection and my acceptance of it. I discovered that the life I thought I was losing had actually been a prison I'd built around myself. The transformation began with small things. I'd bought myself flowers from the corner market, just 3 yellow tulips that cost $2, and arranged them in a mason jar on my windowsill. Such a simple gesture, but it represented something revolutionary. Spending money on beauty instead of necessity, choosing joy over survival, decorating for an audience of one. Margaret Sullivan, my new friend from the grocery store, had invited me to join her book club. 8 women who met every Thursday at the Wicker Park Library to discuss novels and life with the frank honesty that comes when you've stopped caring about other people's judgments. They welcomed me with the warmth of people who understood that friendship could be found at any age, that community didn't require blood relations or history, just willingness to show up authentically. "Eleanor reads differently than the rest of us," said Dorothy Chen, a retired teacher with silver hair and wise eyes. "She finds hope in stories where the rest of us see tragedy." "Maybe because I know how the story feels from the inside," I'd replied, thinking of all the times I'd identified with heroines who seemed defeated until they discovered their own strength. But the most surprising change was professional. Rosa Martinez, the librarian who facilitated our book club, had mentioned that the library needed volunteers for their senior services program, helping elderly patrons with technology, reading to those with vision problems, organizing social activities for people who'd become isolated in their golden years. "You understand what they're going through," Rosa had said. "You've been there yourself. That's exactly the perspective we need." I'd started volunteering 2 mornings a week, and those hours had become the highlight of my existence. Teaching 75-year-old Harold Peterson how to video call his grandson in Seattle. Reading romance novels aloud to Martha Williams, whose macular degeneration had stolen her ability to lose herself in other people's happy endings. Organizing game afternoons where widows and widowers gathered to play canasta and share stories about spouses who'd loved them completely. These people understood the particular cruelty of being discarded by your own children, but they also understood something else: that life continued beyond abandonment, that joy could be cultivated even in the aftermath of devastating loss. On this particular Tuesday morning, I had an appointment that felt like crossing a threshold into an entirely new version of myself. The Northwestern Mutual Building downtown housed the office of Patricia Vance, the financial advisor Rosa had recommended. I'd spent weeks gathering documentation, preparing for a conversation I'd never imagined having, planning for a future that belonged entirely to me. "Mrs. Morrison," Patricia said, gesturing to a comfortable chair in her bright office, "tell me about your goals." Goals. The word felt foreign yet thrilling. For decades, my goals had been extensions of other people's dreams. Getting Michael through college, supporting his early career, contributing to his security while neglecting my own. "I want to live comfortably on what I have," I said. "I want to travel, even if it's just small trips. I want to be generous with the people who've been kind to me. And I want to make sure that if I die tomorrow, my assets go to organizations that actually help people instead of family members who view me as an ATM." Patricia smiled. the expression of someone who'd helped many women reclaim their financial independence after years of subordinating their needs to others. Let's start with what you have and build a plan that serves your priorities. What I had, it turned out, was more than I'd realized. Social security that would continue as long as I lived. The small savings account that was growing again now that I wasn't hemorrhaging money into Michael's lifestyle. The settlement money from my late husband's construction accident. Funds I'd never touched because I'd been saving them for real emergencies that somehow never qualified. "You're in better shape than you think," Patricia said, spreading printouts across her desk. "With some strategic adjustments, you could afford a nicer apartment, occasional travel, and still have a cushion for actual emergencies. Actual emergencies, not fabricated crises designed to drain my resources." "What about family obligations?" I asked, still struggling to break free from decades of conditioned guilt. "What obligations specifically?" "Well, Michael and Karen are having a baby. Shouldn't I be setting aside money for college funds or emergencies or—" "Mrs. Morrison," Patricia interrupted gently, "do they contribute to your emergency fund?" The question hung in the air like incense, clarifying everything with its simplicity. "No," I admitted. "Do they check on your welfare? Help with your expenses? Include you in their support system?" "No." "Then why do you consider yourself obligated to fund their security when they're not invested in yours?" "Why indeed?" The programming ran so deep that breaking it felt like rewiring my entire operating system. But Patricia was right. Financial generosity should flow both ways in healthy relationships, not drain exclusively from the person with less power and fewer resources. That afternoon, energized by possibilities I was just beginning to imagine, I did something that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. I walked into a travel agency and inquired about senior tours. "Where would you like to go?" asked Jennifer, a young woman with enthusiasm that reminded me of myself at that age, before I'd learned to shrink my dreams to fit other people's expectations. "Somewhere warm," I said. "Somewhere I can sit by the ocean and remember what it feels like to have choices." She spread brochures across the counter like cards in a tarot deck, each one promising adventures I'd convinced myself were beyond my reach or outside my deserving. "This one is popular with first-time solo travelers," she said, pointing to a 7-day trip to coastal California. "Small group, lots of optional activities, beautiful scenery, and it's designed for people who want to experience independence safely." Independence safely. The phrase felt like a foreign language I was just learning to speak. I signed up on the spot, using money from my reclaimed savings account, money that had been earmarked for other people's dreams, but now would fund my own small rebellion against the life I'd been told to accept. Walking home through Lincoln Park, I felt something I hadn't experienced since childhood: anticipation. Not anxiety about other people's needs or problems, but genuine excitement about my own future possibilities. My phone rang as I reached my building. The caller ID showed Michael's name, and for the first time in months, seeing it didn't trigger panic or guilt or desperate hope for reconciliation. I let it ring through to voicemail. An hour later, I listened to his message. "Mom, Karen went into early labor. We're at Northwestern Memorial. I thought you should know. My grandchild was being born, and I was hearing about it through a voicemail delivered as an afterthought." I sat with that information for a long time, waiting for the devastation to hit. Instead, I felt something unexpected: clarity. This was who they were. This was who they had always been. And this was the moment I finally, completely, stopped waiting for them to become the family I'd imagined we could be. I called Mrs. Kowalski instead. "Anna, my grandchild was just born. Would you like to help me celebrate by making dinner together? I have wonderful news about a trip I'm taking to California. For the first time in my adult life, I was choosing to share my joy with people who would actually celebrate it, rather than find ways to diminish it for their own convenience." As we cooked together in her tiny kitchen, I realized that this was what family was supposed to feel like: chosen, reciprocal, nourishing, not obligatory, transactional, or draining. The phoenix doesn't mourn the ashes it rises from. It spreads its wings and discovers how high it was always meant to soar. 6 months later, I stood on the balcony of my new 1-bedroom apartment in Lakeview, watching the sun set over Lake Michigan like liquid gold poured across the horizon. The October air carried the crisp promise of winter, but instead of dread, I felt anticipation for the cozy evenings ahead, evenings that belonged entirely to me. The apartment was small but bright, with hardwood floors that caught the afternoon light and windows that framed the lake like living paintings that changed with every hour. I'd furnished it slowly, deliberately, choosing pieces that reflected my taste rather than practical compromises forced by other people's needs. A reading chair upholstered in deep blue velvet, a dining table just large enough for intimate dinners with friends, bookshelves lined with novels I'd discovered through the book club, each one a small rebellion against the years when I'd been too tired to read for pleasure. My California trip had been everything Jennifer the travel agent had promised and more. 7 days of watching waves crash against rocky shores, of eating seafood I didn't have to cook myself, of conversations with strangers who became temporary friends over shared meals and sunset walks. I'd sent postcards to Mrs. Kowalski and Margaret and the ladies from book club, people who celebrated my adventures rather than questioning my right to have them. Michael had called twice while I was away. Both calls went to voicemail. Both messages were brief, awkward, and carefully devoid of actual emotion. Hope you're having a good trip. And call when you get back. As if we were distant acquaintances exchanging pleasantries rather than mother and son navigating the aftermath of his calculated cruelty. I hadn't called back. The guilt I'd expected to feel never materialized. Instead, I discovered something revolutionary. I didn't miss them. I missed the people I'd thought they were, the family I'd imagined we could be, but I didn't miss the reality of our relationship, the constant anxiety, the financial exploitation, the emotional manipulation disguised as care. My phone buzzed with a text from Dorothy Chen. Book club emergency meeting tonight. Rosa found the most scandalous historical romance, and we must discuss it immediately. Bring wine. I smiled, already reaching for my jacket. This was what my evenings looked like now. Spontaneous gatherings with women who valued my presence, who laughed at my jokes, who remembered details about my life because they actually cared about my well-being rather than my usefulness. The library after hours had become our unofficial clubhouse, Rosa letting us in through the staff entrance for our emergency meetings that usually lasted until well past official closing time. 8 women between the ages of 62 and 79, sharing wine from coffee mugs and dissecting romance novels with the scholarly intensity we'd once reserved for child-rearing and marriage maintenance. "Eleanor!" Martha Williams called as I entered, her eyes bright despite the macular degeneration that had forced her into early retirement. "Tell them about the gentleman you met on the beach walk in Monterey." The gentleman, David Fletcher, a retired history professor from Michigan who'd struck up a conversation about the book I was reading on a bench overlooking the Pacific. We'd talked for 2 hours about literature, travel, and the peculiar freedom that comes with reaching an age where you finally stop caring about other people's expectations. "We're corresponding," I said, feeling heat rise in my cheeks like a teenager admitting to her first crush. "Letters? Actual handwritten letters." "Letters!" Dorothy clapped her hands together. "How gloriously old-fashioned. What does he write about?" "Books he thinks I'd enjoy, places he's traveled, questions about my life that suggest he actually listens to my answers. Questions about my life. Such a simple concept. Yet it had taken me 68 years to experience regular conversation with someone who was genuinely curious about my thoughts, dreams, and daily experiences, rather than viewing me as a resource to be managed or problems to be solved. "Are you going to see him again?" asked Sarah Kim, our group's romantic optimist who still believed in love at any age. "He's invited me to visit Ann Arbor for Thanksgiving. The fall colors, he says, are spectacular." "Are you going?" Rosa asked. "I'm thinking about it." In truth, I'd already booked the train ticket. But admitting that felt like tempting fate, as if acknowledging my happiness too openly might cause it to evaporate like morning mist. Later that evening, I sat in my reading chair with a cup of chamomile tea and the latest letter from David. His careful handwriting filling 3 pages with observations about autumn in Michigan and gentle questions about my volunteer work at the library. He wrote like someone who had time for nuance, patience for conversation, respect for the gradual revelation of another person's inner world. So different from the hurried, transactional communication I'd grown accustomed to with Michael. Conversations that felt like efficiency reports rather than expressions of love. A soft knock on my door interrupted my reading. Through the peephole, I saw Mrs. Kowalski holding a covered dish that smelled like heaven. "Anna, what are you doing here so late?" "Making too much pierogi," she said with a grin, "and wanting to see new apartment." "You show me?" I gave her the full tour, watching her nod approvingly at each carefully chosen detail. She paused at my dining table, where David's letters lay arranged beside a small vase of autumn flowers. "Letters from California, man?" she asked. "Michigan man now. But yes." She picked up one of the envelopes, studying David's return address with the shrewd attention of someone who'd learned to read character in small details. "Good handwriting," she pronounced. "Careful, patient. Like man who takes time with important things. How can you tell all that from handwriting? Hasty people write hasty letters. Selfish people write only about themselves. This man asks questions, writes your name on envelope like it matters. Good signs." We sat together eating pierogi and drinking tea, while Anna told me about her late husband's courtship letters, written during World War II when communication was precious, and every word carried weight because it might be the last. "Love at our age different," she said thoughtfully. "Less desperate, more grateful. We know what matters now, what doesn't. Less time for games, more time for truth. Less time for games, more time for truth." It perfectly captured the strange liberation of reaching an age where pretense felt like wasted energy. After Anna left, I stood again on my balcony, listening to the distant sound of waves against the shoreline. My reflection in the sliding glass door showed a woman I was still learning to recognize. Relaxed shoulders, genuine smile, eyes that held peace instead of perpetual anxiety. My phone showed 3 missed calls from Michael, all within the past hour. For a moment, old habits urged me to call back immediately, to prepare myself for whatever crisis or manipulation required my immediate attention and financial resources. Instead, I turned off the phone and drew myself a bath. Whatever Michael needed could wait until I decided I was available to hear it. My emergencies, my health, my happiness, my peace of mind had become my priority in a way they never had been when I was too busy managing other people's needs to notice my own. As I settled into the warm water, surrounded by candles I'd bought simply because I enjoyed their lavender scent, I thought about the journey from that freezing studio apartment to this moment of perfect contentment. The woman who'd sat on a Murphy bed 6 months ago, wondering if she'd been used, had discovered something more valuable than the love she'd been begging for. She'd found herself. I'd learned that family isn't always the people who share your DNA. Sometimes it's Mrs. Kowalski sharing pierogi and wisdom. Sometimes it's book club friends who celebrate your adventures. Sometimes it's a Michigan professor who writes thoughtful letters to a woman brave enough to start over at 68. I'd learned that generosity should be reciprocal, that love shouldn't require you to disappear, that the people who matter will value your presence rather than your presence. Most importantly, I'd learned that it's never too late to choose yourself, to build the life you actually want rather than the one other people expect you to accept. Later, as I drifted toward sleep in my own bed, in my own space, surrounded by my own choices, I whispered a question into the darkness. Was I used? This time, the answer came not as pain, but as power. Yes, but that's their loss, not yours. And tomorrow I would wake up and continue building the beautiful life that was my reward for finally, completely, courageously choosing myself. Have you ever lived through something like this? Or do you know someone who has? Share your story in the comments below. If this message resonated with you, please leave a like and subscribe to this channel. Let's make sure this reaches someone who needs to hear it.